it's good fun, and it does the job it's supposed to do.
Raging guitars, soaring vocals, very macho lyrics.
Just because they play heavy metal doesn't mean the only music that they listen to is heavy metal.
If they didn't play it at a show, there'd be a riot, you know, and rightly so.
If I didn't throw up on the powerboat we went out on, I would get to do the album. Either if I failed, if I did throw up, I'd have to get my ass tattooed.
Judas Priest had a really strange start to their career because they got off to a false one with their debut album Rock'n'Roller in '74, which even they admit wasn't very good at all. It was badly produced by Roger Bain, who didn't quite understand what Priest were about. And to be honest, Priest didn't understand what they were about because they were still feeling their way on the first album. Halford hadn't been in the band that long as the vocalist. He'd taken over from Al Atkins, and there was still a feeling of what are Judas Priest.
The jump from Rock'n'Roller to Sad Wings of Destiny is quite astonishing. Sad Wings of Destiny remains one of the all-time great heavy metal albums. Again, I mean, it's got touches of their earlier sort of not quite as heavy sort of sound to it, but it's also incredibly heavy in other places as well.
Although the production and the overall sound of the album, obviously when you compare it to the metal albums of the 80s and the 90s, obviously the production is more primitive, and it has still has that kind of warm brown analog sound that, you know, that would have been around in the early 70s and all the rest of it.
I met them at Morgan Studios in 1975, I think it was. They booked in to do, it was the single the song called The Ripper. And I was an assistant engineer then. And I remember walking into the session, because I joined, they were working with somebody else, some other assistant, because that's kind of how it was, you know. And I walked in to witness KK doing the solo on it, and I saw this mad bloke with long blonde hair going ballistic with a whammy bar and a wah-wah pedal. I thought, oh, I like this lot instantly, and I worked on that, and yeah, that's how we met.
Musically, it was a massive turning point, and in some ways it's almost like the first real heavy metal album, even though, you know, obviously people cite Sabbath as a metal band. It was really Priest that kind of removed the last tiny bits of blues from the whole thing, and turned, you know, kind of drew a line between hard rock and heavy metal, and Sad Wings of Destiny is kind of where that really started.
If you look at the sort of atmosphere at the time, as I say, punk was just about to happen, but you were getting these very ambitious heavy metal hard rock albums coming out, because in '76 not only did you have Sad Wings of Destiny, you had Rainbow Rising, which once again was a very overblown sort of mystical album. You had Rush's 2112, very ambitious concept album. So Sad Wings really fitted in very well, I think, in the spirits of that particular time. So Priest with that album, I think, were sort of testing the water slightly.
You can see where the band that would go on to make sort of Stained Glass and Killing Machine were sort of gathering momentum.
it was a great break for me because the engineer got taken ill, and they said, well, go on, have a go. And I said, all right. Didn't know what the hell I was doing, I suppose. So nothing's changed. And it was brilliant. You know, I had a great time and got my name on an album that went on to become, you know, in the rock world, a bit of a classic, they tell me. No one knows they're making a classic album. No, you know it's good to yourself, and you can't be that, you know, it really is down to the people that buy it to tell you if it's any good. And time then says, you know what, look at that record launched a whole bunch of people and it's a classic. And you go, well, okay, if you say so, not for me to say.
There are certain songs on Sad Wings of Destiny, Judas Priest's second album, which have beautifully stood the test of time. Tyrant's one, which always reminds me a little bit of Deep Purple's Stormbringer, but the two which always come to mind, the two they still play live and people love, are The Ripper, which is about Jack the Ripper, and it only lasts about 2 minutes 40, 2 minutes 50. It's not a long song, but has a really chugging, grating, grunting riff, and a certain sense of nastiness lurking in the shadows. It really brings to mind Victorian atmosphere. And a second is the rather more epic Victim of Changes, which proved for the first time Priest had what it took, not just to do short, sharp shocks, but could actually extrapolate and expand because they had the musicianship to do it.
The real secret about that track is that, well, for a start, nobody had sung really like Rob Halford before that particular track had come out.
I mean, that's, you know, some of the high notes he hits on that, which define, you know, that's what most people know Halford for, is his ability to hit notes that only dogs can hear.
I mean, Robert Plant of Zeppelin obviously had that signature scream, but somehow Halford had a hell of a lot more aggression, and his voice was piercing to the, you know, the nth degree.
Victim of Changes sticks out to me because the guitar solo was the first guitar solo I ever recorded for anybody, anywhere. And how about that? That's brilliant, you know, absolutely top. It was great because you could make a suggestion and it was embraced, and that was really, really good for me, because I remember there was this, we wanted this on a song, Victim of Changes, there was this nice bit where it quietens down and there's a nice little guitar part, and it had to be gentle and sort of flowing, and we had a Fender Rhodes stereo piano which has a set of speakers built into it with a chorus effect, and it drops from one speaker to the other. I thought, why don't we plug the guitar into the piano, and that's what we did. And obviously you can get a chorus pedal now to do that, but this was, and we used it, and that's the sound on that record, on that particular part of Victim of Changes. And it was great, you know, because any mad idea you had, you could have a go.
It defined the style, it defined the way that Priest locked the guitars together, and defined the way that Rob Halford on vocals interacted with the guitars of K.K. Downing and Glenn Tipton.
There's a track that builds, then slows down, there's a very soft bit, and then reaches a great climax at the end. So I think, you know, it kind of defined Priest at that particular point in their career.
There's a certain irony in Judas Priest's switch after 2 albums from an independent sector to a major sector. The irony lies in the fact that the guy who set up Gull Records, to whom Priest was signed for both the Rock-A-Roller and Sad Wings of Destiny albums, was a guy called David Howells, who came from CBS, where he'd made a significant name for himself in the late 60s, early 70s. Howells decided he wanted to go it alone in the independent sector, found this young band in Judas Priest, nurtured and guided in their really early career. The problem for Priest was they're getting a lot of praise, but were still having to do part-time jobs to finance themselves. And Gull didn't have the wherewithal to move them to the next level, which is where Priest were desperate to go and felt they could go. So to me, there's a certain smirking irony in the fact that Priest outgrew someone who used to be at CBS and then went to CBS.
I think if you're going to think of songs that Judas Priest are going to cover, Joan Baez's tune is probably the last thing that you're going to think of.
I'm not sure what Joan Baez would have thought of their interpretation of the song, but it's it fits perfectly well into everything else that Priest were doing.
Priest just took that and bludgeoned it to death, really, which was the right approach in my view.
Diamonds and Rust is it's an interesting one because I mean essentially it's a folk song, and but had you if someone told you that was a Priest original, you wouldn't bat an eyelid, because although the lyrics are maybe a little bit more wordy and flowery than you'd expect from a Priest song, it sounds like a Priest song. The riff is a classic Priest riff.
I mean, they handled it with a certain amount of sensitivity. Halford has got an amazing voice, and he doesn't just have to be screaming out, like maximum heavy metal to prove that. The only sort of weird thing is that they chose a Joan Baez song. But, just because they play heavy metal doesn't mean the only music that they listen to is heavy metal, which is a mistake a lot of fans make.
The band are people who grew up in the 60s, and the metal bands today were influenced by metal bands, whereas Priest didn't have a lot of metal bands to listen to when they were in when they were in their early teens. They were creating metal as they went along to a degree, so to cover a Joan Baez song wouldn't have seemed weird to them, because it was a song that they would have listened to when they were younger. They were, when that was the rock music that was around, did come via folk and via the hippie scene.
Sin, I don't think had the great commercial hits that subsequent albums would have done, but at the time I think it really captured quite a sort of bleak metal mood that that Priest have subsequently refined to great effect. But as an obvious debut for a major record label, I think it was quite an ambitious thing to do, and I'm not sure if many people kind of got their head around it at the time.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required.
Stained Glass is a classic. It's the blueprint for modern day heavy metal, because it takes the sort of the power and the energy of what Black Sabbath were doing and then builds on it. And from that you've got you can almost hear the roots of modern power metal, thrash metal, heavy metal, and whatever other metal that you want to sort of call upon. The roots are sort of are in what Priest were doing on Stained Glass. I mean, they were just basically taking everything they'd done and making it heavier and more powerful and faster and louder.
Once again, quite a bleak and sort of mesmerising album. Very brooding in parts. Very kind of quite a dark mood, And I think Priest would lighten up considerably later on in their career.
I mean, Stained Glass' first album, where the macho leather and whips and chains and all that sort of stuff was very much to the fore.
Everybody knows. Everybody knows.
I remember Rob absolutely loving Queen and their sound and their whole thing, and he wanted to go in that kind of direction with big vocals. The stage show started looking a lot better. Always smoke, dry eyes, bombs, whatever. You know, to go that theatrical route, costume changes. So they've always been about doing that, and it just seemed the completely natural thing to do. There was never, oh, let's sit down, I know, why don't we, you know, kind of happened.
The image arrived at the same time as the logo and of the, you know, we are metal and that's it kind of approach that Stained Glass brought.
For Leather, which was on the album known in Britain as The Killing Machine, and is the title track of that same album in America, because the Americans thought The Killing Machine was a bit too violent as a title and said, we'll go for Hellbent for Leather, has become a celebrated song, because at the time it was twisted a little bit into the phrase well bent for Trevor by various people, because everyone knew then Rob Halford was gay.
I don't think too many people at the time thought of a homoerotic angle to that. Priest being Priest, obviously, and Halford's subsequent coming out, shall we say, you know, I think loaded things onto that particular title that perhaps weren't necessarily there to begin with.
Hindsight's a wonderful thing when it comes to Hellbent for Leather, and I think you can find a lot of songs on Priest albums which suddenly take on a slightly different hue when you realise that, you know, that Rob's gay.
Rapid fire, pounding the world like a battering ram. I mean, that's the opening line. You know, if you were looking for something, it's right there in your face. Breaking the Law is littered, you know, with references that could be construed, you know, about doing something, you know, on the naughty side that's illegal. Living After Midnight, you know, if you really wanted to, then that song could say to you that it's all about cruising the gay clubs of wherever, you know, after you've played a gig.
I think, as with most of their songs, you could, you know, like I say, they sang a lot of songs about relationships between one person and another person, and apart from, you know, maybe Victim of Changes where he actually uses the word woman, you know, there's no reason to believe that he wasn't singing about a guy, and there's no reason why he shouldn't, you know, because it is ambiguous and universal and anyone can relate to it, you know. I think Hellbent for Leather is a bit of a pointer, really, you know. And, you know, here was a guy that was, you know, perhaps the only singer in a heavy metal band at that time that had short hair and that would come out on stage with a whip and start lashing the sweaty men in the front row. Is you know, it's amazing that not more people didn't put their hands up and go, hang on a minute, there's a very real chance that this guy might be gay.
If you want to find this stuff, you will find it. That doesn't necessarily mean, you know, the meaning, the real meaning behind this song is homoerotic. Killing Machine is, well, I mean, you're in a run of the classic Priest albums. You've got Stained Glass, Killing Machine, and you got British Steel, and you know it's you know that was one of their purple periods. You know, you've kind of find bands they'll have a run of maybe 3 albums that are absolutely astonishing, yeah, and that sort of define either their entire career or certainly a significant part of their career. You know, Priest have had good albums since. But I don't think they've had a run of 3 absolutely amazing, sort of jaw-dropping albums. Stained Glass defined what they were about as far as heavy metal went. Killing Machine took it another step further, and British Steel exploded it to a mass market.
How do you define the greatest Judas Priest album of them all?
I think there's certainly a case to be made for saying that British Steel is one of Priest's best, if not the best.
I think British Steel defines Judas Priest, and it's almost their quintessential album.
It's probably the first one that you go to when people ask the question, what's the best Judas Priest album?
Now, for a lot of people, British Steel represents a true birth of heavy metal. I would contest, actually, probably Sad Wings of Destiny does. However, British Steel is the most celebrated and triumphant of all the Priest albums. It's got all the elements you want. Raging guitars, soaring vocals, very macho lyrics, very anthemic, fist-flailing, fist-waving music and fist-waving songs. It's a denim and leather album, if you want to put it in that context. If you want to define heavy metal, in a way, British Steel does it better than any album ever, because Judas Priest are heavy metal.
Breaking the law, 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 breaking the law.
It was the moment where they went from Killing Machine to British Steel, and the last tiny traces of blues, all that 70s influence, just totally disappeared, and bang on the beginning of the decade they come out with an album that this is a heavy metal album, British heavy metal album particularly.
I think the great thing about it is very, very celebratory of the band's Britishness. And the cover, which is a hand holding a giant razor blade, you know, is I think very symbolic, you know, and it kind of brings back the whole Sheffield Steel thing, you know. It touches a few bases.
British Steel is when the whole thing came together. All they've been threatening with Sad Wings and then Sin After Sin, Stained Class and The Killing Machine just hit. Everything was perfect on that album. Metal Gods, Rapid Fire, Living After Midnight, all those songs are just absolute giants.
There's some great stuff on there, without a doubt, and I think it's a really good balance of very, very hard hitting heavy metal and some kind of, you know, less hard hitting, sort of carefully worked pop songs almost.
It's very easy to write a heavy metal song that's just a heavy metal song, but it's very difficult to write one that's still heavy and catchy, so that someone at radio might be interested in playing it, but you're not going to piss your fans off because it's become popular, because it's still heavy. And that's what Priest always managed to do.
Priest just hit a focus and a groove at that point. They hit serendipity, if you will. And fate created one of the greatest, not just greatest metal albums of all time, one of the most important rock albums of that era.
Breaking the Law is one of those songs like Smoke on the Water and Paranoid that are by no means the best songs in their respective bands' catalogues, but they are the catchiest songs and the easiest to digest. And Breaking the Law has an opening riff which is so instantly memorable, you can, you know, whistle it after hearing it just once.
I think it's a sense of humour about it as well, which some people miss out with Priest. They do have a great sense of humour, but the whole thing combines and it sends a real smile on your face.
Absolutely hilarious track. I mean, it's Priest at their cheesiest. I think it was done with tongues firmly in cheeks, and if it wasn't, you know, a bit of a shock, really.
It's a brilliant anthem, absolutely superb. And one of the cleverest things about it is in the middle of the song you hear the sound of breaking glass. At a time when sampling didn't exist, what Priest did in the studio was actually smash up milk bottles to get that sound. So we're using a little bit of studio ingenuity. But the thing about Breaking the Law is it's just such a rousing, galloping anthem. You never get fed up with it.
If they didn't play it at a show, there'd be a riot, you know, and rightly so. And I think British Steel was the moment where heavy metal became a thing in its own right, and the image that Priest had as well, with the studs and the leather and the hair and the, you know, the motorbikes and everything else. Although there'd obviously been elements of that in hard rock and certain bands had toyed with that stuff before, Priest absolutely nailed it, and this is the heavy metal sound, this is what a heavy metal band looks like. You go to a heavy metal show and there's a shitload of pyrotechnics and lights, and it's really exciting and explosive and over the top. Certainly
those three Priest albums of Stained Class, Killing Machine and British Steel, that is where you can see that modern metal really sort of came from, you know, or at least that and Sabbath, you know, put the two together and you've got one hell of a heavy metal band.
Interestingly enough, Judas Priest with British Steel have reached a point in the UK where they were pretty popular. When the first Monsters of Rock at Donington happened in 1980, Priest was second on the bill. But what they hadn't really done is crack America big time. They'd been there, they certainly started to get a buzz going. What they did with Point of Entry is say, okay, we got a strong audience in Europe and in the UK and in Japan as well. Let's turn our attention to America. Let's make an album the Americans can start appreciating. And they made an American-friendly metal album.
Quite frankly, I mean, Point of Entry is not a very good record.
Point of Entry is no one's favourite Priest album, is it? Surely, I can't imagine there's anyone out there that prizes it above all the others.
I think Glenn Tipton's gone, or KK, one of the two anyway, have gone on record as saying that they were under too much pressure because of the commercial success they'd achieved with British Steel to sort of follow it up. They were on the back of a run of great albums. And then this album came out. It's like, well, what the hell's this? You know, it's slow, it's ponderous, it's moody, it's not very catchy. You know, little wonder they didn't have any hits off it, really.
It wasn't as heavy as British Steel. It didn't have as many catchy songs on it as British Steel. The sound of it was a little bit too polished, and although, you know, there are some metal bands that, I mean, even Priest sometimes can get away with being polished. It doesn't necessarily reduce the power of what they do, but it didn't really suit them at that point after an album like British Steel. So, with the possible exception of Heading Out to the Highway, I don't think there was any songs on that sounded like the super confident Priest that had developed over the previous few albums.
It was a risk. They could have easily just ended up collapsing, not making it into America, and really being superseded and overridden by the new wave of British heavy metal, especially Iron Maiden, and ending up with no career whatsoever, or the remnants of their career. It didn't happen because Point of Entry was good enough, and they played live with a certain energy and power that convinced British audiences, oh, Priest are still a great live band. Well, maybe not convinced by Point of Entry, but let's be honest about it, that songs like Desert Plains live have a real edge to them.
I think, yeah, Point of Entry, there's been a couple of albums in the Priest catalogue where it looks like they've lost their way slightly, but I think because of, you know, in the 80s people were much more prolific and could do an album every year. There would only have been a 12, 18 month period where people were saying, oh, Priest have lost the plot, and then of course they release Screaming for Vengeance and it takes everyone's head off, and it's like, oh no, they were just having a laugh with Point of Entry, don't worry, we won't talk about that anymore, let's listen to this one instead, you know.
I think as soon as you hear Screaming for Vengeance, which was a follow-up to Point of Entry, you know Priest have found their mark, not just in America, but have found a way of recording an album that was going to be big in the United States without divorcing them from their fan base in the UK and in Europe and Japan. And the songs hit very hard. And the perfect example is the opening of Helium and Electric Eye, which combined is still a great Priest opening. It's very dynamic, very big. It's a huge production number that actually doesn't need much production. It's all in the sound.
It's a killer combination, really. Hellion followed by Electric Eye. You know, you can't really get too much better than that.
The Hellion and Electric Eye is the only way I would expect Priest to start a show. I can't imagine them starting with anything else now, but it would be nice if they did. The Hellion is one of those things, it's like, you know, you hear it and it's like, ah, Priest are coming on in a minute. They don't actually have to be on stage as that thing plays, you know, and then the opening riff kicks in and the lights go off and Halford's standing at the back and they're all in position, and it's just one of those kind of perfect moments that, you know, it's, you kind of know it's coming, but, you know, in a kind of slightly nostalgic, cosy way, it would almost be a shame if they did anything else, although they could, you know.
Great dynamic instrumental piece which opened the Screaming for Vengeance album and crashes into Electric Eye, the second song. And that's the way Priest has started their show for so long live, because it's a perfect way to do it.
Electric Eye always, to me, conjures up visions of Lord of the Rings and this great big glowing red thing, you know, going across the planet and killing all its surveys or whatever. So it is a bloody good start to a show, without a doubt. But Priest have got so many classics in their back pockets.
Like all the greatest metal bands, when they come on stage, you know they're there and they make a huge impact, and you know you can't take your eyes off the stage, and you get that massive adrenaline rush, and that's a brilliant way to open any show. You know, there's a lot of drama in what Priest do, and the Hellion is such a dramatic opening. It's almost, you know, it would work if an orchestra played it. You know, so it's yeah. I think even watching them do it now, I still get that sense of being a 16-year-old, you know, practically wetting myself with excitement. You know.
The fact that Screaming for Vengeance was such a big success was purely because it was a great album. There were no singles really propelling it. It was just a great all-round epic. It's kind of like if you take everything that they'd done up till that point, but particularly British Steel and Point of Entry, it was like a kind of distillation of all the best parts of those albums, with a renewed level of heaviness. I mean, it's by far the heaviest album they'd done at that point, particularly the title track, which is, you know, pretty brutal, really. And given what else was going on in metal at the time, with the emergence of thrash and all the rest of it, they had to kind of put their foot down and kind of assert their authority as the leading heavy metal band. And I think that they did that with an almost flawless collection of songs.
Screaming for Vengeance became a massive record for two reasons, I think. Firstly, because the time was right in America. There was a feeling that heavy rock, heavy music, hard rock, metal, or whatever you wanted to call it, was making a real inroad in the United States, especially through the burgeoning MTV and so forth, and radio was much more aware and acute to what was going on. And secondly, because they'd made a great example of it. All their experience over what was, at that time, nearly a decade of recording came to roost on that album.
Priest were one of the first British heavy metal bands to really, really sort of ride through on the back of MTV. The hair is bigger. The jackets have got more tassels on them, you know. The leather trousers are tighter, and the whole stage production is bigger, right? And that just says one thing: try and sell to America, because unless they have it like that, you know, they can't get it.
It's just one of those things, you know, synchronicity, when you make a brilliant album just at the point where you need to make a brilliant album, and then everything explodes.
Turbo in 1986, I've always believed, was an incredibly brave attempt to be something different. The vast majority of people will disagree with me and reckon it's complete rubbish.
Oh dear.
I don't think it was a horrible mistake necessarily. I mean, you know, it was still a relatively popular album, but I think it freaked the fans out quite a lot. You know, they thought, what on earth are they doing?
Turbo.
I think Turbo was a fantastically brave move for Priest, actually.
It's okay.
Turbo was the album that I struggled with for a long time. I actually really like it now. It's, I wouldn't say it was one of my favourites, but I think it's a much better album than it appeared at the time. But it was a bit, oh my God, what have they done? It's got keyboards on it, you know, and lots of them, and they're really prominent on every song, and it all sounds very futuristic and modern. I mean, now it doesn't sound futuristic at all. It just sounds like they've turned on the DX7, you know, and someone's done that for 20 minutes.
I think in hindsight, you kind of listen back and think, well, I can see what you're trying to do. I'm not certain it worked all the time.
Songs like Turbo Lover, Parental Guidance, Locked In, Rock You All Around the World, they're very good tracks.
I love Turbo Lover. It's a fantastic track. The way Halford says, "I'm your turbo lover," it's just brilliant. And the song sort of throbs and pulses, you know, and I don't know, it just all works really, really well. I think it's a great, great track.
Turbo Lover is actually very similar in tempo and feel to You've Got Another Thing Coming, except for, of course, the synths, you know, but it's one of those plodding ones with a kind of pulsing beat, and I don't know whether it was a deliberate attempt to recreate the feel of You've Got Another Thing Coming, or a way of covering their backs, maybe, in a way, because we're doing this album that's radically different, that's got all these synths on it. Perhaps we ought to do something that at least people can recognise as being a kind of Priest-style thing, so that it doesn't freak anyone out.
Most Priest fans didn't like it. I think it's a strong song, and if you take away the synth influence, it actually stands up as a very good Priest anthem, but because of all the layered production and so forth, most people shrug it off and say, well, like the whole of that album, bit of a waste of time, wish they hadn't done it. There really was a sense of going into decline at that point. When Painkiller happened in 1990, Priest were in desperate need of a real shot. Now, they'd gone to the whole area and era of turbo. They tried to get back to basics again with Ram It Down in '88, and had failed particularly. Wasn't a great record. They did an appalling version of Johnny Be Good that most people would rather forget. So Priest were really at a crossroads. There was a new, young generation coming through who weren't just challenging for the supremacy of metal. They were threatening to knock bands like Priest into the middle age, making them really irrelevant in a funny sort of way.
I did this band called Slave Raider from Minneapolis, and they had their video on MTV, and Glenn was watching it with Ken, and they thought, well, who the hell, this is amazing. Well, the sound of this, and they found out it was me, called me up. They went over to Spain to meet them. What about making a record? Sure. Okie dokie. So the test actually of getting the record to do was, if I didn't throw up on the powerboat we went out on, I would get to do the album. Either if I failed, if I did throw up, I'd have to get my arse tattooed or something like that. So I kept my dinner in, let me tell you.
This is another example of Priest, you know, subtly turning the screw, really, and reinventing themselves, but not in a completely obvious way. But having said that, I think Painkiller is an extremely brutal record, very much in keeping, once again, with the spirit of metal of that time, which had become quite brutal and quite extreme. You know, bands like Slayer obviously were entering the mainstream. Bands like Pantera, who I think Rob Halford used to be a very big fan of, were influencing, I think, Priest's approach at that point.
I don't think anyone believes that Priest getting heavier and harder on Painkiller was anything to do with trying to copy what was around them to maintain their status, but really taking on board the influence and thinking, this is great. Because these bands are taking, the most dynamic and fast and frenetic stuff we were doing from, like Staying Class and Killing Machine, and they're taking it and making it even more, and they got influenced by that.
Those of us that like really heavy music were shitting ourselves. It was a fantastic record, This is my favourite Priest album, bar none.
I think people got a bit fed up with kind of the pap that was going on by most other bands. And it was like, we're going to make a heavy metal album and it's going to be heavy. Okay, says me, no problem. And we did. I felt, to me, for a long time, when they started changing back into the heavier sort of sounds after Turbo, when they ram it down, etc., the machine style wasn't what it should be. As a fan, I wanted to hear a proper, band playing. And that's kind of how we approached that record. They played it all together. We then went back and replaced the guitars with the proper sounds and everything, but it was played with a drummer from start to finish. No tricks, no computers, what you hear is what happened. And that is a great performance. And that's why I think that record sounds a big contribution to why it sounds like it does, because it's people giving it their all.
Painkiller was kind of like Priest saying, yeah, we can do this stuff as well, and actually we can do it at the same time as still being a traditional heavy metal band, and we can rip your face off. You know, the title track particularly is just that absolutely fucking outrageous song. You know, it's one of the most ridiculously over-the-top metal songs of all time, and yet it's totally credible. It's not like a bunch of old guys trying to do a thrash metal song. It's a classic. You know, full stop.
It's so heavy. You know, it's almost relentless. And they were right back on form with that. And in fact, it was only Halford quitting, you know, that stalled what could have been another great spurt.
When Rob Halford left the band in 1991, everybody was amazed, not least the rest of the band. They didn't see it coming. They knew Halford wanted to do a solo project. In fact, in a way, Halford was the one driving getting more extreme. He was excited by a new era with metal going further and further underground, more energetic, speeding up, dynamism. State-of-the-art metal in 1980 was Iron Maiden. By 1990, what Iron Maiden represented was far more mainstream, and Halford was excited by all of that. And then suddenly he felt, you know what, I can't do it in Priest. Despite the fact that the rest of the band said, take a break, do what you want to do, we'll get back together in a couple of years, he decided, no, it has to be a complete divorce. I have to get away from Priest. I think for the band, it was the biggest shock of all. For the rest of us, we were all amazed by it, but you can imagine what Judas Priest was thinking after how many years together, suddenly we don't have a singer anymore.
The two remaining main guys in Priest, the guitarists KK Downing and Glenn Tipton, felt a bit lost without Rob, really, and didn't really know what to do. I think they knew they wanted to carry on with Judas Priest, but they didn't really know how, and they didn't really know what kind of guy could replace Rob, you know. So it took them a long time for them to get their head around that.
Priest waited 5 years and then found in Tim Ripper Owens the best possible replacement. Strangely enough, he came from a Judas Priest tribute band, so his hero was Rob Halford. But what Ripper managed to do from the early days was actually stamp his own mark on things. He sounded a little bit like Rob Halford, but he wasn't Rob Halford. He was very much his own man, certainly in those early days. And you thought, you know what, Priest were absolutely right to wait as long as they did, because they got the right guy for the job.
I think Tim was a good choice in that he sounded similar enough to Halford that they could, you know, in theory, do similar material without it sounding like they'd crowbarred in somebody desperately inappropriate on top of their traditional sound, but they also changed their sound at the same time, and so it did seem slightly incongruous while Halford was doing some slightly bizarre stuff himself at the time, you know, having done Fight and then doing the Two thing, which was just weird and wrong. It just seemed that both parties were kind of clutching at straws a little bit at that point, and the Jugulator album, although had it not had the Judas Priest name on it and had somebody else's name on it, I think people would have been a lot more receptive to it. But it was losing someone as iconic as Halford kind of meant that Priest were a bit stuck.
Well, it certainly wasn't Priest as you wanted them, but I'm an old Priest fan. I'm going to see Judas Priest because I want to hear the classic songs, and I don't mind that Ripper's up there singing them. Am I interested in any new records they put out? Not at all.
Ripper Owens, Tim Ripper Owens to give him his full name, did 2 studio albums with Priest. In '97, Jugulator, which was a good introduction. The problem was that there was very much a two-pronged feeling towards the situation. Some people felt Priest without Halford shouldn't be carrying on. Other people felt, well, you know what, it's too modern. Somehow it doesn't represent what we want from Judas Priest, the old Judas Priest. Priest took Painkiller as their benchmark and 7 years later moved it forward. It was certainly an album that wasn't designed to compete with what was happening in the world of metal at the time. The the thrash, death metal, also the emergence slowly of new metal. But it certainly reflected the time.
I think Jugulator's a great album, but it's not a great Priest album. It's kind of it's something else. They tried something and it kind of worked, and that you know, and I think they should be applauded for that, really, because they could have done an album of, you know, kind of sound-alike Priest classics and stuck Ripper on them, and it would have been the soft option. But instead they opted to do something that was a bit heavier and a bit darker, and to give their new singer something slightly fresher to work with, you know. And there are some good songs on that album.
Cathedral Spars, a great track. Burn in Hell, Bloodstained, really strong songs. And the thing was that Tim Owens on that record proved that while he was definitely following in Halford's footsteps, he was no Halford clone.
To a lot of Priest fans, Priest stopped after Painkiller and started again with Angel of Retribution. And I think, you know, it's almost like there's nothing too much wrong with those albums in a way, but they're not really part of the Priest story in the same way. They stick out as being, you know, a little bit ropey compared to the heights that Priest are capable of.
You've lost your head, sir. Well, you will tomorrow. Sleep well.
When Rob Halford came out on MTV, literally came out on MTV and said he was gay, I think there are two things to bear in mind. Most people in the industry, most bands, most managers, most record labels said, well, we've known that for years, so what? No surprise. No surprise to Priest, because they said, well, yeah, we knew about it. What amazed a lot of people was that the fans didn't know. They were stunned. They had no clue that the metal god, their hero, their idol, Rob Halford, despite all the hints over the years, was actually gay.
Halford announcing he was gay was about as shocking as discovering the Pope was a Catholic or the bears shat in the woods. We all knew it. You know, I mean, he didn't have to tell us. You only had to see him mincing around on stage to sort of, you know, I mean, and I'm not being homophobic by saying that. I mean, he had, you know, certainly I remember on the Painkiller tour sort of standing there and thinking, maybe you shouldn't mince around quite so much, Rob, you know, it's getting quite effeminate.
And I think there was an initial shock, but the interesting thing was, while the tabloids and certainly the yellow press in music and in media tried very hard to paint it as, how can the metal god, the man who stands at the pinnacle of the most macho music in the world, be gay? Most fans said, so what?
Most people were like, yeah, whatever, it's Rob Halford, he's the metal god, you know, does it really matter? And of course it doesn't, you know, I mean, if it bothers you, then you're a fucking idiot, aren't you, really? So.
But interestingly, when I talked to Rob, when he returns to the Priest ranks, he said to me that if he'd stayed in Judas Priest, he would never have come out as gay. He'd never have come out as gay, because he didn't want to damage the band. But he was glad that he came out when he had a break from the band. So when he returned, everything was, you know, out in the open, and nobody really gave a damn. I think Rob's return was inevitable if Judas Priest were to survive. You know, they've done a couple of decent albums, decent studio albums with Ripper, but it wasn't really happening, you know.
Priest were in commercial decline. Their sales were going down, there's no doubt about it. Ticket sales are falling off, record sales are falling off, and however much they stood by Ripper Owens and said this is the guy for the job, you always knew sooner or later the pressure was going to be on them from two areas. One, commercial, two, musical. Because nobody worked better with Priest than Rob Halford. So yes, there was an inevitability about it and a great delight among the fans. But I do feel sorry for Ripper Owens because he did nothing wrong.
It was one of the great reformations that you wanted to see, I guess. I mean, that's the great thing about bands, people leaving bands, is that they've always got the option of coming back. And whilst half the time they come back and it's utter cock, you know, other times, like the Judas Priest reunion, you know, it all works. It all falls into place again, and it's all absolutely fantastic. I think Angel of Retribution is one of the best albums I've ever made. I think it topped most metal writers in the UK, their album of the year poll. Because it's such a great record. You know, I mean, it had everything. I mean, the songs were really good. Even Loch Ness. you know, it's just an awesome record. And Halford sounds brilliant, singing with the band again. You know, it just encompasses everything. It was great. It was heavy, but it was still very catchy. You know, and they were great live.
As a fan, I think not what I would have wanted to hear. I wanted to hear where Painkiller left off, because that's where it should have. And it didn't. And maybe that's what they were writing at the time, obviously, you know, but certainly if I had anything to do with it, it would have been a much, I don't know what the word would be, more of a continuation, I guess.
I think with Priest, it's a combination of Rob Halford, Glenn Tipton and KK Downing, which makes it work. Ian Hill's an important part. He's been there since day one and is very much crucial to the Priest setup. Scott Travis is a great drummer and he's been there since 1990. But in reality, the heart, soul, mind, brains, passion and power comes from the three guys up front, Halford, Downing, Tipton. If Ian Hill left tomorrow, people would say, great bassist, he did a tremendous job, but another bassist to come in. As long as those three are there, then Priest are there.
It's good fun, and it does the job it's supposed to do. You go see them and you come out, big grin on your face, you've lost a load of dandruff, and it's great, you know.